Warm greetings. On behalf of W4W Foundation, welcome to another session of Friday Waters. The idea of Friday Waters is to wet the Fridays with fun and yet get fruitful content for the better understanding about water matters in different possible ways. Friday Waters has water talkies, book reading, thesis club, and water arts, which happens once in a month actually. The focus today is on the water reading club, and it is to bring author or authors who have written books, novels, comics, or other kind of manuscripts about water matters in order to discuss with them the making of the book, novel, or comic, and the issues around the subject they have tried to cover in the book. Besides bringing interest in the water conversation, the session also increases the outreach of the book, novel, or comic in the water networks and the society at large. So in a way, we try to really get more people know about the book. Today, we shall be discussing the making of a book, namely Global Groundwater Source, Scarcity, Sustainability, Security, and Solution, the subtitle of the book. And to do the honor, we have Professor Dr. Abhijit Mukherjee, who is the lead editor of this 2020 published book by Elsevier. Before I provide you some basic details of the book, let me first briefly introduce Abhijit. Abhijit Mukherjee has a PhD from University of Kentucky, USA. He is currently a professor at the Department of Geology and Geophysics and School of Environmental Sciences and Engineering at the IIT Kharagpur. He has over 20 years of teaching and research experience, including serving as a physical hydrogeologist at the Alberta Geological Survey in Canada and working at University of Texas at Austin. Among the many awards and recognition, in 2016, he is conferred the National Geoscience Award by the President of India. He's been awarded the prestigious Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize, the highest multidisciplinary science awards in India, for the year 2020 in Earth, Atmosphere, Ocean, and Planetary Sciences. He's a fellow of the Geological Society of America and Royal Society of Chemistry in UK. He's been associate editor of several journals, including the Journal of Hydrology, Applied Geochemistry, Groundwater for Sustainable Development, Frontiers in Environmental Science, and Journal of Earth System Science, just to name a few. He has a long range of publications, and I'm really happy to have heard him many a times in many platforms. And among his many publications, today's book is one of them, and he leads among the 6 editors of the book. So welcome, Abhijit. Before I get into the details or logistic details of the book, let me get some opening remarks from you on conceptualizing and making of the book.
Hello, Mansee. It's just a sheer pleasure to be in this platform. I know you have been asking me for quite some time, and our times were not matching up. So I'm just delighted to be here today. This book, it has been so far my most ambitious adventure, not just because, the book is quite thick, but it also kind of brings in a diverse field of domain experts across the globe. And as you just mentioned, that the book covers from starting from sources to solutions, you need to have an understanding of all these different facets. So this book, like when we decided to edit and co-author this book back in 2017, 2018, the idea was that till now, we talk a lot on groundwater, and groundwater is one such resource, natural resource that are depleting very fast, and there is a lot of interest into it, but there is no one complete compendium that anybody can go in and look at the scenario of the global situation of groundwater from all these aspects. So me and my co-editors, co-authors, we decided to split this book up into various facets. And if you go by the name, all of them are leaders in their own domains. So if I may just name the co-editors. So we have Bridget Scanlon from the University of Texas at Austin, who is like a legend in groundwater research. We have Alice O'Reilly, who is the head of water at UNESCO. She is really big shot, and of course, she's leading the UN on water. We have Simon Langan, who was the head of IWMI at one time, and was looking at surface water, groundwater interaction. Huaming Guo from Chinese University of Geoscience. He's also the editor-in-chief of Journal of Hydrology, um, and a global expert on groundwater pollution. And Andrew Mackenzie from the British Geological Survey, who has tons of experience, possibly 40 years of experience working with groundwater systems across the world, specifically Africa and South Asia. So, with this diverse expertise, when we sat together and was trying to figure out what is the best way of doing it, we thought that, we should split it up into these thematic areas and bring up one compendium that should serve both as possibly a textbook as well as a reference book for people who would be interested in the real science to managers and policymakers.
Thank you. Thank you for also acknowledging your partners in the book, particularly the editors. So coming to the basics of the book, Global Groundwater Source, Scarcity, Sustainability, Security, and Solution, it was really overwhelming for me to see that it has 45 chapters. It has 116 contributors, including 6 of you, as you already named them. So I'm going to re-announce their name: Abhijit Mukherjee, Brigid R. Scanlon, Alice O'Reilly, Simon Langan, Huaming Guo, Andrew A. Mackenzie. So good that now you told me, so I know them much better than actually reading their bio through Google. So it gives more, human feeling. The paperback book is 676 pages. So again, and I'm happy that I had it in possession from you for good time to really digest and chew it better. It weighs around 1 kg and 830 grams, at measuring 21.59 multiplied by 3.45 multiplied by 27.94 centimeters. So you can imagine that it's a thick, fat book. The book is available online for sale. It has a price, and I am going to share the link in the chat box. It's available with Elsevier as well as Amazon. And you can imagine if with that thick book, I was really a little bit surprised with its reasonably priced, which is 150 USD. And at present, it offers 20% discount, costing to 120 USD for both paperback and ebook. Now, coming to the brief of the content of the book, as we all know that groundwater stress is faced by many regions, almost all the regions across the globe. The book categorically provides insights into some compelling insights of groundwater scenarios from across the world. Thematic subsections include groundwater studies on sources, and this is how also the chapters are laid out: scarcity, sustainability, security, and solutions. Each section provides a scholarship to integrate the knowledge on groundwater, ranging from its availability to pollution, national to political to local level groundwater management, to even going transboundary aquifer governance, and also reviewing some of the good as well as challenged local and global case studies. We dig into more with Abhijita and understand the intensive use or explosive use, I usually say, of groundwater across various regions of the world. Particularly, it concerns when we people in India who are the largest extractors of groundwater. So Abhijita, just the essence of the book, and let's say youngsters who look at your book and they get scared with its width and length and also the depth of the scholarship. What made you really make such a fat volume, and what will be the key takeaways so that people can start looking into it? Of course, we all read the preface to get an understanding where would I really indulge in the book, but some key takeaways to get started, because the 6S also gives a clear direction where one would like to indulge into the book. So what will be your key takeaways for the youth?
Okay. So I'll first say how we ended up doing it.
Yes.
So like I said, that back in 2017, 2018, I was finishing up my previous book, which was The Groundwater of South Asia. And as I was doing that, I could see that there is a lot of interest in not just South Asia, but across the world. And I have my colleagues, through my work experience in groundwater scenario across the globe, that there are these different sides of groundwater which are less explored sometimes, and sometimes, it's barely talked about even. And then, like I'm trained as a hydrogeologist, more from the science background, but then there are people who are also working on water, but maybe from the social science background, or maybe from the governance background, or even from the medical side, because there are different facets of groundwater. And I, just as a student of the science, I try to look at like what exists, uh, in the in the domain of the knowledge. And I honestly could not find one specific volume which would have a continuation from these different facets going around through these domains. So then I had this idea, and I talked with my co-editors, who were all very supportive and said that, oh, we should do it. And then several of the publishers were already kind of contacting me for another volume that I can edit. And so I talked with Elsevier, and they were wholeheartedly for it because they also saw the value. And that's how it started rolling. Now, when we started rolling, the initial idea was to have like I don't know, it was supposed to be like a 300-page book, honestly.
Yeah.
That's what the proposal was. But then as it started rolling, we realized that we cannot do a justice just by 10 or 15 chapters, but we need to kind of assimilate more ideas, more depth as well as breadth to the
Yes.
topics. And that's when it slowly kind of added up and became from initial plan 10 to 15 chapters to 45 chapters. And so it was more organic, I would say. Like it kind of happened, not by plan, but by choice. And the if you go by the name of the authors of each of the chapters, you would see like they are the who's who in groundwater field.
Yes.
Including contribution from NASA, contribution from US Geological Survey, British Geological Survey, all the the topmost people who would be working. Now, saying that, I don't want to forget this. Of course, you talked about the 45 chapters, but you possibly didn't notice the 6 forewords that are also in the book, which most people would not highlight. But I would definitely highlight on these 6 forewords, because if you go by the names, some of these forewords, well, not some, all of them, they are actually authored. Maybe they are few lines, but they are authored. It's like a blessing to the book, and they are authored by the legends of the groundwater science. So that includes Joe Toth, which most of the newer generation student would not have heard about, but he is Isaac Newton of groundwater. Okay,
Yes.
he's still alive and is almost like 90 years old. But it's his contribution back in the 60s, which kind of revolutionized the concept of groundwater. Then I have also got a foreword from Frank Schwartz, the book of Schwartz and Domenico and Schwartz, Schwartz and Zhang, the textbook that we all follow in our classes. So Frank Schwartz, who is my academic grandfather in some sense, he kind of wrote one. The other one was authored by the president of the International Association of Hydrogeologists. So what I meant to say is, this is not just a book for publishing. It is just like a collection of the knowledge, the insights from the time that modern groundwater studies started back in the 1960s till 2020. And we wanted to have this one compendium, which would be kind of a one-stop for anybody to, if they are interested in any facets of groundwater, they should be able to find at least something to begin with in this volume.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I was going to actually ask you with a little bit of surprise, because I have not seen many forewords in one book in my little journey of academics. I will be very honest on this. So let me just also tell the names of the other people who have written foreword. Claudia Sadoff, the DG of International Water Management Institute at that time. John W. Hess, President of Geological Society of America Foundation from Boulder, United States. Then we have, as you rightly mentioned, Franklin W. Schwartz from Ohio University, an eminent scholar, a living legend in your own words. Joseph Toth, Professor Emeritus of Hydrogeology from University of Alberta, Canada, and of Antonio Chambel, President of International Association of Hydrogeologists. So that itself is like a big blessing. And as you rightly mentioned, that the book tries to cover the length, breadth, and the depth of the subject matter, which as a layperson, I say A to Z is there, So coming to some of the questions from the book now, with your due permission, let me just start the engagement in terms of Q&A with you so that we get a little bit into the content of the book. The best part, even if it is 45 chapters, which I realized while going through it, is that, and that's a message for all the youth who should not get worried looking at big readings, is that you can actually read one chapter at a time and give your mind some rest, So the chapters are quite well knitted, and I must say comparatively shorter than as I see in other books where the chapter itself gets longer. So what I'm trying to say is that actually I could read one chapter a day or 2 days, 3 days, and just give my mind a little bit of time to really ingest the whole thing and understand and make sense of what they're saying. Many of the words were quite technical for me, having not studied in hydrogeological, discipline. But nevertheless, I could get some sense as a lay person of what it is trying to convey to not only the science, but also to the society. This is also something which I must appreciate about the book, that even though it's a scientific literature, but I think a person who is not from the field can also try to go through the book at ease, because many a times scientific articles becomes a little bit challenging for non-scientific people. So that for me is a big, I will say, bonus when I was going through the book. So what I have done is actually divided the conversation into those S, which are the subtitle of your book, to ask you questions. So sources, scarcity, sustainability, security, and solutions. And I would like to start with the discussion on sources. And I'm taking a dig from one of your chapter itself, where you are talking about the advancement in technology, and which is actually to large extent supporting us to more exploration and abstraction of groundwater. And we are also aware that technology is going to go further, or it is going to advance further. That also means that it is going to allow us more extraction. And as I started my concern also when we started this conversation, India being the largest, how do you think India fares in really looking at its source? Do we have unlimited source really? Even if we go, let's say we assume a hypothetical situation that our technological advance at this moment can go unlimited.
A very good question, Mansee. And I would first like to stress on the fact that, like petroleum, like petrol that we use in our car is like 105 rupees per liter or something like that, at least in Kharagpur and Kolkata. Now, a person who is just tapping some water out, that's almost like free, excluding the prices of electricity and so on. And that's the difference people don't understand. Both petroleum and water, groundwater, it's a natural resource, it's a geological resource that has accrued in the subsurface for millions to billions of years. So when, like I'm drinking from my bottle of water here, and again, I don't know the source of this water specifically, but if it is groundwater, I can vouch for it that that water is at least 100 years to few thousand years old. What it means that when you say that water is unlimited, or whether you can find it anywhere, people can use it. So when you are drinking that groundwater or bringing out that groundwater, you are actually, just like petroleum, you are basically taking out a geological history, a history that accrued for a few thousands of years. What it means that it took thousands of years to develop what it is present today. Or in other words, if you take out that resource is gone for good, ever. So definitely, like any other resource, groundwater is limited. Now, if somebody asks me like how deep you can go for groundwater, well, it's a tricky question. My understanding would be you can get groundwater up to the mantle core boundary, after which it doesn't exist as water molecules, but turns more like minerals with minerals. But we are not just interested in just groundwater, but water that you can use as a human being.
Absolutely.
Right? Because deeper groundwater, more than I would say like 500 meters deep, it's not actually very usable. Now I know even in India, some places they use 700, 800 meters deep water, mostly in southern India, because they don't have shallower water. That's a very exceptional story, but beyond 500-meter, typically the groundwater is not human usable. The reason is it's just not the availability of the water, but also the quality of the water, because the quality of the water deteriorates to such a level that you cannot really use it for human consumption or human use without like a very dedicated treatment. So definitely, so if I need to answer your question very shortly, it's a very limited resource. You cannot find it forever. You can have advancement of technologies, but literally what you are doing is you are just digging out fossil water.
Yeah.
The fossil water, once you take out, it's never going back. So you are literally depleting out a natural resource that is not going to come back. And we all have to understand that. And in most part of the world, there are growing concern, and so is in India. And India has, one, unlike many other parts, including the US, a dedicated organization from the government who just look at groundwater. Okay, so we have the Central Groundwater Board who does fabulous work. If you look in terms of US, being another, the world leader in science and technology, they don't have a dedicated groundwater organization per se. So in that way, we in India are better equipped, studying groundwater. Saying that, many of the modern knowledge and modern technologies of groundwater, since this is an idea that is just coming up in the last about 12 to 13 years now, there is a lot of mix up, like you can, based on the classical knowledge, and you want to be very modern. So there is a whole, the gradient is too steep for evolution, unlike in the US, which has happened in 50 years. So there is a lot of mix up, and people are confused what exactly needs to be done. So that is a problem. And so what we try to do in this book is we try to streamline this knowledge. Specifically, if you look at South Asia, the concern about groundwater in South Asia started back in 2008, 2009.
Yes, it's very new concern actually.
Yeah, and the reason I'll also tell you, and so the reason being that there are a couple of publications using some of the NASA satellite missions. So you will see one of the chapters authored by Matt Rodell, who is the lead of hydrology in NASA. So his team and some also of our colleagues at India, like VM Tiwari and others, they published a couple of series of publications using those satellite products, where they were the first time were able to show that groundwater in India is depleting at a alarming rate. Now, before that, even the government organizations like CGWB or the state organizations, they were aware of it, but in a much local scale. It was these NASA publications, NASA related publications, that first time kind of awakened us and told us that we are literally taking a dip to the hell. Okay, and so what happened since 2009, I know that there is a lot of awareness, a lot of people are talking about it, but then the devil comes with the fine prints, right? When there is a lot of awareness, there is a lot of mistreatment and misunderstanding of things. So what we try to do in this book is try to lay out and streamline this concept in a more lucid way, technical, but also non-technical people can understand, so that people take and understand what the sources are, what are the different type of sources we should be looking at, and how you will be able to use it.
Yeah. When you are laying out the sources, you also actually tell us what kind of methods and models which have been, applied so far to understand and or to incorporate the groundwater, processes from various degrees of complexity, let's say. So when we talk about this classification, and now if I understand that we may dig for and get something out, but it may not be the groundwater we are aspiring for. right? So that is something as a layperson I must be more aware about. So, but if I get into the little bit of science of it, we have now some of the most advanced technologies to understand. But from a layperson knowledge, it's an invisible, resource. So whether I like it or not, I have to rely on science, what science says, and groundwater is just a decade old issue in the country and in the world, where by then, India has been already supplementing its surface water requirement from groundwater. And I was having Tushar Shah sir actually last month to talk about his South Asian experience through his book, which he wrote quite some time ago. And the discussion also comes to you as well, because now we are so much heavy dependent. In fact, we really don't see surface water as our main source, but groundwater as our main source, and we see surface water as something which is going to recharge, let's say. Not We are not doing so much of recharge as we should be, but the rate of extraction is way too higher than the rate of recharge. So in that case, how do you see the relationship of surface water and groundwater from our perspective? We are doing a lot of things on recharge as well. Will that help to increase our source of groundwater, maybe shallow aquifer? I don't know. I mean, I'm just asking out of, curiosity. Let's say a farmer. If I recharge in my
Right.
own land, I'm still in a prisoner's dilemma. Should I be doing or should I not be doing?
So Mansee, I really like your word, like whether we like or not, we have to rely on science.
Yes.
And that's exactly the view, the population has. And
Yes.
people try not to look at the science.
Yes.
And
But still we have to
consequently,
rely.
what consequently has happened is, a lot of people are talking about a lot of things, excluding the science or the knowledge of the science in itself. So I definitely would try to emphasize on the science, being a scientist myself,
Yes.
that understanding groundwater to begin with is a science.
Yes.
It's actually a more complex science than people understand. In some way, it's a combination of physics and chemistry and geology, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, and so on. It's a much more evolved science than the basic sciences. Now, to answer the question that you asked about the surface water groundwater interactions, now, first thing I'd like to say that they are one entity. So
Yes.
surface water and groundwater, in most of the systems where you get larger volume of groundwater, what we call the porous aquifers, let's say the Ganges system, they are actually connected system. So where the groundwater intersects the topography, you get the river water. You can also look the other way around. You think like where the river water disappears in the ground, it becomes the groundwater. So we have a new concept coming up, which is called one water. Okay, so you don't think about groundwater and surface water differently. Now, contrary to what you just said, that whether we are doing enough recharge or not, I mean, it's a complex thing. I'll come to that in a minute. But let me first tell you that in most of the cases, actually the surface water, the rivers that you are seeing, they are actually groundwater flowing out.
Yes.
Like,
The water
okay,
table
so,
is higher.
well, like I hear it so many times that Ganga, the Ganges River in India, or the Brahmaputra, or the Indus, they are glacial fed rivers. Yeah, they are glacial fed, but only in the upper stream. As you come downstream, let's say I take the example of Ganga. If you come downstream from Allahabad to Varanasi and down east and south, Ganga is actually an absolutely groundwater fed river. You take the case of Narmada, Godavari, Krishna, Kaveri, all of them. Where is their water coming from? There's no glacier. So where is it coming from? It is actually the groundwater that is keeping them alive. So in one of our recent studies, and it was just almost parallel to this book, we found out that the Ganga River is drying. Okay, and you mentioned Dr. Shah, Professor Shah, Tushar Shah, and I had a very close and integrated discussion with him. He was relying more on the surface water and the groundwater usage and so on. And I said, look, if you are using up the groundwater, you are at the end of the day you are also affecting the surface water.
Yes.
And what we have found out over the years, the Ganga river is drying. Okay,
Yes.
in the last
So
20
we
plus
say
years.
drying, we mean the surface water we don't see,
Absolutely, absolutely. So as we are taking out the groundwater, let's say in Uttar Pradesh, in Bihar, in West Bengal, we are literally taking out the Ganga water. So Ganga is drying because we are using too much groundwater on the surroundings. Now, whether you can recharge and that would bring back the water, it's a little more complex scenario than just putting some bore wells and putting some water inside, because there is also something.
That's the layperson thinking, huh?
True, but then what they forget, and even the mathematical people do that all the time. What they do forget that what you're looking at the subsurface is a geologic formation, and that geologic formation has their own things, which you cannot just explain by looking from the surface. You need to have a thorough understanding of what exists in the subsurface. So what we proposed, and I still have that view, that before you go for recharging, you need to have an understanding of what exists in the subsurface. Because if you don't do that, what you in turn you are doing, maybe the ground, well, there is one reason that groundwater nowadays is used more than the surface water, because in natural sense, groundwater is a more safer variety of water than surface water. Surface water being directly discharged with industrial waste and other things. Groundwater, it goes through a natural filtering process as the water is getting recharged. Now, if you are putting a bore well and trying to recharge the aquifer, what you are doing, you are short-circuiting that natural process, right? You are just putting in the water from the rivers now to the groundwater.
So
not realizing that the groundwater, which was possibly safer or possibly more clean to drink, is now gone.
Yes.
Okay. So again, I reemphasize and I come back to the science question. Most of this policy has to be scientifically driven, technologically prudent. If you bypass, this concept, the science and technology concept, you are actually fooling yourself and, kind of putting your future generations in trouble, in real trouble.
Yeah, interesting. Because if we would like to understand it, there has to be ways, and that's where the book is really a good friend, I feel, because I had never read so much about groundwater despite working in the water sector for nearly 3 decades now. So I must also acknowledge this and also thank you for agreeing to do this, because then I was pushed to read about the subject matter better. And also having worked in surface water mostly and water governance, I was just trying to understand if something is invisible. I think the only invisible thing we have been nice to is God, in our society. I will be very honest on this. And groundwater is invisible, but we have not been so nice to it, I must say. Looking at the striking figures of groundwater exploitation, I pull out an interesting chapter from the book, and that talks about groundwater drought. And the people from NASA are also involved in writing that book and all. And I have a very simple question from the book, from the chapter, and very generic question, again, as a lay person. If I am not seeing it, and if I still can afford, I'm not talking about those small landholder farmers, but if I'm not seeing it, I can afford, I can really go on doing it, then whose scarcity are we talking about in the society? Because when we put up a scarcity, and if we want to measure that scarcity, it is most of the time an aggregate scarcity, But then when we get into the grains of it, then we see actually more social grains than the grain of the hydrology itself, because those who are facing the scarcity is not because of the availability, but because of the affordability, where I don't know, I may be wrong, but scientists can't really do much about the affordability part of it, because it is a social political game, or it's a political economy involved in it. So when we are in that kind of a game, social game, where the hydrology or the science or the natural science, which is the groundwater drought, is to be experienced or to be informed, how do you think the scarcity can be signaled to the society? I mean, one, of course, we're talking about science, but then government itself has a responsibility to signal. And you very well mentioned that we have the Central Groundwater Board. So what kind of signaling tools we are using, apart from, of course, if I face the scarcity by not able to draw or not getting a good quality, what kind of signals are there to change my behavior as a I will say appropriator, let's say.
Okay, so the first question, like what is the first signal or the first symptom of scarcity? Well, there's scarcity are of two types. Okay, so you can have scarcity of availability,
Yes,
as well as have the scarcity of quality. Now, the scarcity of quality is possibly more visible in some sense that places where there is a problem with the quality, it typically shows up as symptom as human health, because people would be using groundwater as their primary source of drinking water, and just like, let's say, the example of Bangladesh or West Bengal, even now Bihar and Uttar Pradesh,
arsenic,
and or if you talk about let's say Andhra Pradesh, you talk about Rajasthan, you have the fluoride problem. So people having all these diseases which are now known, like earlier it was thought to be an act of God, but now after like learning groundwater for last 60 plus years, we know that these are nothing to do with God or religion. This is just drinking bad water, and so that's a more easy signal to pick up. But when you are talking about a scarcity problem more from a quantity point of view, I'm a field hydrogeologist, so I travel quite widely.
Yes.
And I would go to all these villages and people would complain, now, sir, in the summertime, we're not getting the water. But then the monsoon comes, their water rules are gone, and they forget about the whole thing until the summer comes next time. And this is not just the land farmers, on the ground, also the policymakers. I still recall back in 2017, I was having this conversation with a very high-end official, I would not, of course, name. And I was showing some of the outcomes of some of the studies that we have recently observed. And I was explaining that how we all know that the Punjab Haryana region is dying out.
Yes.
But what I was trying to emphasize that the Eastern India, specifically, East Bihar, West Bengal, and Northeast India, like Assam, is dying out at a faster rate. And the policymaker looked at me with a smirk on his face. What the hell you are talking about? We get floods out there, right? And of course, they thought like I was just talking rubbish. Fine, fair enough. 5 years, 6 years afterward,
May I request, Abhijit, sorry. May I request participants to mute themselves, because I'm trying, but I can't mute. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Abhijit. Sorry.
Yeah. So 6 years after, there's officials of similar rank, or there's maybe the same official, they called me up just last month and they say, sir, we are having all this water crisis, groundwater availability crisis in all these areas. And I said, didn't I say you that? So things are not immediately visible in terms of quantity. You don't see it immediately visible, and it slowly piles up. By the time it piles up, you have nowhere to go. It's gone. Yes. Okay. Now, on the contrary, I would just take you the example of Vidarbha. And Vidarbha region of Maharashtra, as you know, actually is quite in the news because we have this drought happening in Vidarbha.
It's a quantity problem.
Well, in the contrary, Vidarbha is actually a different problem.
Just
because,
Sorry.
In Vidarbha, actually groundwater is rising. But because of some certain geologic formation more near to the surface and the hydroclimate, we are having or seeing drought. So in Vidarbha, we are not actually having a groundwater drought, but more of a surface or, like a climatic drought. But more toward Punjab and East Bihar, West Bengal, we are now going toward a groundwater drought. So signals are not very easy to pick up, and you need to have a multidisciplinary approach to understand what exactly happening in terms of the scarcity.
Yeah.
I don't know if
So,
that answered your question.
yes, of course. And I think a very important point which you mentioned, and this is where, as a layperson, I think we can understand it better than talking about saving groundwater or, less extraction, is the water epidemics, which you mentioned. But water epidemics is also not noted right up front. It's a
No.
pattern which comes, and then you see, okay, this is a belt of arsenic, and that's why these kind of, there are many medical practitioners, researchers, scientists who have worked over decades to establish this relationship, to move away from God and say that, yes, there is a problem with the water, and that's where
Right.
this pattern. And as we stand today in the world, water epidemics is the leading pandemic, I must say, with more than 50% diseases linked to water and the health of the water, which affects the health of us and all other creatures for that matter. But in this kind of situation, when we are informing about the scarcity, both in the quantity aspect and the quality aspect, I would like to draw your attention to a little bit of the nature of farming, because that's the major, I must say, not exploiter, but appropriator of groundwater. And when we see its nexus with the energy, and then we started the discussion with technological innovations and all, how do you see that we can really engage the farming community with this issue and change their approach to groundwater extraction? And is there a way especially I would like to now bring my own focus in our country, where we are so much about economy, we are willing to give everything on toss, and that is completely seen in the way farming attitude has changed over the time, from sustenance farming to cash cropping and all. In the water intensive, water shortage area, we are doing water intensive and all. So in this rush for economy, do you think this is a convincing argument that groundwater drought is rising?
Okay, so good question. And what I would like to start on by saying, I really love to say this, statement, that the practice of irrigation in this South Asia, specifically the South Asian region,
Yes.
is pretty much same as our forefathers used to do in the Indus Valley.
Okay.
Okay.
That's good to know for me. Yes.
So, like as much as I'm also a history geek, so I try to learn what had happened in the past.
You mean by proportion in terms of population?
The technologies.
Okay, technology.
Yeah. And one of the reason that you are seeing all this groundwater drought, because you are right, like almost 80 to 85% of the groundwater that is taken out is actually for food production.
Yes.
Okay? So there is a huge connect between the society and the economy and the water usage,
yes,
and the groundwater usage. So the reason that people are taking out so much water, literally, is because it's mostly free. Had it been petroleum, do you even dare to think that they would be taken out? No, of course not.
There's a direct cost benefit.
Absolutely. What you're getting out in return. And I'm taking out the water from my field. How do I care, like, if there is a drought in my neighbor's field, right? That kind of mentality. They don't understand that it is not just a neighbor's problem, it's your problem too.
Come next to you. Yes.
Yeah. Now, I have personally worked in Texas, as you know, like it's a pretty dry place. I have my friends who are in the Middle East, in Northern Africa. I definitely have some of my colleagues, and actually a co-author on this book, from Israel. And you would see that in their areas, like they have also got a lot of food production. Okay. In Texas, I specifically know about a lot of basmati type of rice production. It's not called basmati, it's called texmati, right?
Okay.
Right? Yeah. Now it's a desert, literally a desert. If you go to West Texas, it's a desert. But how then they are growing all these rices? Because they have used a more efficient water usage technology, because they don't have water.
Yes.
Water in Texas is a commodity. You can sell it. Groundwater rights you can sell. So in those kind of scenario, if you are trying to grow rice, you have to be more intensely planned than, oh, the water is in my backyard, I'll just take it out. So the sole crux of the problem of groundwater drought, mostly in South Asia, in some parts of East Asia, Northern Africa, one is the availability of the water or the groundwater recharge is happening or not. But if there is water, let's say we talked about the example of eastern parts of India, like Bihar and West Bengal. Why I'm saying that the water, or in the Northeast, in Assam, why is I'm saying that the groundwater drought is imminent? Because in these areas, which are known to be affluent with water, having flood all the time, in these areas, of course, the local policies don't restrict them uses of water. So, you take more water and you spread it in the field. And that's that's my father did and my grandfather did. And my 16th generation back there, they also did. It worked perfectly fine. It's a time-tested technology. So we'll use it. It's free.
But the quantity has changed, no, with the change in technology, no?
Is it? I doubt.
I don't know.
I mean, quantity has possibly increased, not decreased, for sure.
Yeah, of course, increased. Yes.
Yeah. Well, just like, rice. Rice is one of the most common crop that would need a lot of water, right?
Water intense.
Well, that intense, I have a lot of question on that intense word, because my understanding is rice plant actually don't need that water. They use it for some other purposes. I'm not a biologist or like an agriculturalist, but what I understand that water they use for rice production or the paddy growth is actually for a different growth in the nutrient cycling in the rice crops. The rice plant itself doesn't need that water. So if you can augment that need by some means, in many places they do that, you don't need that water. But why are people still doing it? Because it's free. So it's a socio-economic problem, of course, with a political will. And I still recall, like 10 years back, 12 years now, I tried to work with the government to try to kind of bring in some kind of regulation. Of course, the government has to bring the regulation. I was just an advisor. But it didn't really work out because the politics played in.
Yes,
and you can imagine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I think,
the problem is not just a science or the technology question. Of course, science and technology would tell you what is there and what needs to be done with that. But it's possibly more the society and the politics and the goodwill that would eventually play and tell you how much reserve we can use.
Yeah, I think we need an independent session to discuss the political economy of groundwater, especially when we want to talk about balancing the livelihood and balancing the ecology, particularly in this case, the groundwater itself. So let me just move on to another part of the book where the stress is on the security of it. And you talked about availability and quality, the security also, the discourse on security also goes in that direction. And especially when we are talking about sustainability linked with security, what do you think now we should be foreseeing some forthcoming, kind of challenges of doing sustainable groundwater development? I mean, are we still in that process? Because I could read, and we had few sessions on Bangladesh where we could see some of the, steps taken there. So what kind of challenges do we foresee if we really want to get something in place? First of all, we still have to have more robust institutional mechanism to go for it. But what will be the do's and don'ts if we want to put something in place? I mean, we still do not have a regulated groundwater, but let's say we can.
Well, it's a very, kind of a diplomatic question that you asked. And since you brought up the example of Bangladesh, I know a lot of people would get mad at me, but I guess I need to say this.
Speak your heart.
Yeah, so Bangladesh being a landlocked country and having very limited natural resources, I would say the study of groundwater, specifically groundwater and groundwater governance in Bangladesh, because they were hit by this arsenic crisis, is actually 20 years ahead of where we are today.
Yes.
US is 50 years ahead, Bangladesh is 20 years ahead.
Yes.
So Bangladesh, I believe, again, it's a smaller country, and I think less
economies of scale. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. But Bangladesh has really come up in the last 10 years or something, right? Even in terms of the economy. But saying that, so groundwater management, groundwater governance, institutionalization of groundwater policies in Bangladesh is possibly much more well knitted than in India. Now, India is, of course, a more diverse country. And of course, we have a much more different array of geologic structures, which will eventually become your aquifer and provide the groundwater. So India has its own problem, and so is the other countries across the world, specifically South Asia. Now, when you say that you need to manage this groundwater, you cannot have one size to fit all.
Of course,
shoes.
no.
And that's where the problem lies. And that's what I suppose the policymakers kind of don't understand. And that's where the science and technology comes in. That if you need to have these institutes or institutionalization of groundwater governance, it has to be, in a more collective and more segregated structures.
More decentralized?
Decentralized for sure, but it's more targeted on areas, because every area in India, being such a diverse country, like every area has its own problem, or not just the human problem, but also the geologic problem.
Yes,
and the groundwater problem. So I still recall I used to work in the US for a long time, and in the US, from back in the 1978, I believe, we had this concept of regional aquifer management, okay, and the models and everything. So what we used to call the hydrogeologic districts. So
Yes.
even every state has different hydrogeologic districts. So let's say the state of Kansas, it had like 6 hydrogeologic districts, because even though Kansas is a pretty flat, low-lying, high productive groundwater area, every area had its own groundwater problem. So you need to manage the groundwater on the ground. I mean, I can write 1,000 pages on groundwater governance, but unless you really bring it down to the local area, you're not going to govern it. So the basic challenge of first sustainability and then securing it for the future generation is trying to understand the local problems. So what I've tried to stress, in a philosophy as well as through this book, is that for a global problem, you need a local solution.
Absolutely. And it's laid out very well, in some of the chapters.
And again, there is a back and forth. So
Yes.
this global problem can only be solved by a local solution, but then the local solution is also feeding to the global problem.
Yes.
So it's a two-way traffic.
Yes.
Now, most of the times, policies are made, at least in India, which are kind of, like a carpet policy. I don't want to criticize any
Yes,
agency.
but we have groundwater is a central issue, right? Not a state issue.
It's a central issue, yes, to my understanding, but also the state have some say.
Devolution has not a devolution of at least decision making, or maybe regional groundwater management plans. I at least I have not come across regional groundwater management plans.
Well, I can tell you that at least for the state of West Bengal and Odisha, working with the government, I was trying to develop that.
Yes, we need that. High time.
Yeah, well, for these 2 states, at least I was asked as an advisor to prepare something, and I did that for West Bengal back in 2012, Odisha as close as 2021. So I prepared those schemes and shared those with the respective policy making agencies, but I don't know what came out of it. But it is a high time, if we really want to conserve our groundwater, we need to go forward. And again, it's just not the science and technology. So this is the other side of the topic. So far I've been emphasizing on the science and technology, but you need to have a socio-economic acceptability, adaptability, as well as the political will to integrate.
Absolutely, absolutely. In the solution part, I could see there was kind of a, I will say, chorus amongst most of the authors when they are writing about the role of measuring the aquifers. And we know it's a simple thumb rule in management or management principle. We say that what can be measured can be managed. And in groundwater, now, since energy has remained a proxy to groundwater, measuring, I must say, but how do you see the role of measuring the aquifers sustainably can be really transcended from measuring it through the energy part? I mean, we still do not have tools to do that. I mean,
yes. So the first thing is, now there is a historical perspective to this, and Most people are not very aware of this. So the modern science of groundwater, like I was talking about, it developed back in the 1960s. The question would be, well, people had a lot of surface water, at least then. Why would then you need to understand groundwater? So it actually started from the petroleum industry. So as petroleum exploration started and the technologies developed, they also tried, because you have to go to petroleum basins, you have to go through groundwater, right? So unless you understand groundwater, you cannot understand petroleum. So they started exploring petroleum, and that's where, there is a subject called petroleum hydrogeology. It kind of developed. And, some of the authors of the forewords are actually those legends who developed the science then. Now, to answer your question, the solution, like if we are trying to go for how we efficiently use energy and how we efficiently use it for find out a solution for future times, is also embedded in that knowledge. That how do you measure? So in petroleum industry, there is a whole lot of high-end tool that are available today. So most of the petroleum basin, most of them would be kilometers deep, right? But then we still have a better understanding of the petroleum reserve than the groundwater, which is possibly 100-meter deep. So you can understand the paradigm.
Right? The tools will be same probably to measure.
Right. And one of the reasons that it has not gotten the limelight, the trust, the enthusiasm so far until the last 10, 15 years, that, like I said, groundwater is free. So it's a reserve, it's a resource that is free.
To God.
So, two of the science disciplines which are most closely working with groundwater, one is geoscience, and the other one is civil engineering. They have not, to my understanding, of course, have not really give the head to study groundwater to the extent that they should have. Consequently, if you look at the historical perspective, until back from the 1990s, it was not a topic, only the most stupid people would go and learn that. It's not the brightest people's subject. Of course, the trend is now changing, and we have more brighter minds coming in the topic. And I'm really hopeful that, the sensing and the technologies of seeing groundwater reserve, which is literally invisible, would become a more, dynamic subject in the years to come.
Yeah, I also hope that we really have more novel and innovative ways to measure. So we can actually start talking more about measuring the groundwater extraction, and that kind of implicitly can roll out to managing the groundwater, because unless and until I know how much I am extracting, I am not holding myself responsible for it, So that's kind of also will be very crucial to bring a behavioral change. That brings me towards the last question, because I also need to respect time that I have sought from you. I know you already talked about that the discourse is already around there on one water. And I have actually more questions in my list of Kitty, but let me just stick to the last question now here from my end. Then we open the floor for some questions from the participants. Since groundwater is now our major source of life and livelihood, we accept that fact now. Where do you see the future of, you mentioned it very briefly also, future of groundwater science and research from the time when you had, Abhijit had started, and where we are today? I mean, I'm sure you are quite optimistic about it, but we would still like to see if the increasing science and research is really able to contribute to the decreasing groundwater stress, because the increase in science and research is directly proportional to the increase in stress, which is a simple research phenomena also. There is more research on the things where there is more problem in the society. Where do you see the science and research of groundwater heading for?
Right. So in the last 15 years or so, to my understanding, the groundwater science and its research has taken a quantum leap. Okay, and that's because some of the newer technologies that have come up, mostly remote sensing technologies, they have really, opened up our eyes in trying to understand regional groundwater systems. Now, saying that, and just being a teacher in the class, I always love to tell my students that, okay, you get so excited with newer technologies because, nowadays we have the AI and machine learning as a buzzword. and so are the remote sensing satellite technologies. But unless you are really reading the classical, the theories, you're not going to get the basics. You can apply as much technology as you want, but you still need to rely on the concepts.
Yeah.
So taking a cue from that, I would say that, I do see a bright future for the science, the topic, not just the science as a science and technology, but also the social science side. Uh, but I also social science and sustainability. I shouldn't forget that. But what I would like to definitely, emphasize to all the audience that are out here, that unless we integrate the basics with the future technologies coming up, you are just would be the six blind men and an elephant.
Yeah, and the
Okay.
elephant in the room, huh?
Yes. And I know, believe me, I would not name anybody, but I know enough people across the world who are really known in their own domain, who just have a very part picture. And I'm not saying that I am also able to see the whole picture, but I think through, working through this book and working through the other things I'm working in, I think I do understand or do appreciate at least that the basics and the technologies are all connected. You cannot decouple them.
Yes.
Saying that, and maybe this is more of a good way to advertise my future project, which is I'm just working on, hopefully finishing up, is the water for sustainable development. So water matters. So where we are targeting, and again, this is connected in some way to this present book that we are discussing, that water and groundwater, they are not just a commodity for food production and drinking purpose, but they actually act at each level of the 17 SDGs that we are aware of.
Yes.
Starting from zero hunger to low poverty to gender equality, good health, talk any. Okay.
Climate change.
Yeah, of course, climate change. So in that book, that of course is not out yet, it's going to come out in a few months, we try to show how water and groundwater is going to be connected to each of these 17 SDGs, the pillars on which the modern society is kind of standing. And I would think, again, maybe we'll have another session with that book.
Of course.
As we are kind of transgressing through the 21st century, going to the future times, hopefully ChatGPT would not wipe us out.
Yes.
We have a lot more stories to tell in future times.
Absolutely. And I'm also hoping that you will make a conscious choice to come up with one water edited volume where even surface water people and atmospheric water and all kinds of water people can really have their share in the book, and we eventually start looking at things in this planet as one water. I mean, it's one water planet, so that is something which
absolutely
great. So I look forward to it, and probably then I can chip a little bit in through my surface water studies in that as a contribution. So thank you so much, Abhijit, for taking these questions, and pardon me for my naivety and ignorance in my questions, but that was the whole purpose also, because to understand things from a layperson perspective and also convey it to people in that same language. So may I request participants to please unmute themselves and pose their questions, suggestions, or appreciation, or any comments if you have for Abhijit. Let me just check also YouTube, because there are sometimes messages in there, and then I can read that out for you. Are there any questions for Abhijit? You may please unmute yourself and ask, or anything if you want to add to the topic. Okay, usually people take some time to ask, but I don't see that people have also put anything in the chat box. Nivedita, I see you unmuted. Are you going to speak?
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Very nice, Abhijit sir. It's first time actually in my life I heard such type of book having so many forwards. A big compliment to you, sir. And I can see Dr. V.M. Tiwari, sir, you are saying that I think he is from NGRI, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Already big experts also, renowned person, they have contributed, and you have given lot of knowledge and insights about this groundwater depletions, which I came to know regarding that present water that we are getting, that is historic, actually, collections. That's just like your fossil depletions, whatever we are having. So we can say that that is also endangered type of word we can use for this groundwater sources wherever, throughout the world, actually. But I would like to say, are you also giving any insight that what are the measures, means alternative sources to protect this groundwater?
Okay, that's a good question. And again, there is no one source that would cross the border. There is and there is a lot of research going on in present times in alternate water sources, and that starts with desalination of seawater, or remediating wastewater, gray water to blue water, as they call it, and so on. But again, each of them do have their own issues, and again, we should not take it as a all-purpose pill. And I would say, yes, there are different types and different forms of solution that are coming up. Just the other day, somebody was contacting me about capturing moisture, atmospheric moisture as a water source. It does work in some places. It's not a new technology, almost 20 years old, and does work. But again, where would it work? It's not going to work everywhere. So again, we have to keep in mind the solution should be locally adaptive and locally suitable. So in one word, I would say that yes, there are solutions, but the solutions need to be integrated with the local policy, the local society, and of course, scientifically valid.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
That's what actually I was looking, that some solutions should be there, because problems are many, and of course many are now because of government interventions and many other researchers. Not only many initiatives are going on, and people are also coming to know that okay, this groundwater sources is depleting day by day, but we need more and more solutions. Of course, as a scientific person, I am also working in this atmospheric water. We are getting some challenges in this, and as you rightly pointed out, it will not work in every place. So locality wise, we should have the solutions. That's what I wanted to have. What type of solution will work in which type of locality? If the book will also have such type of lights, or in any other time, if you are going to publish such type of, that will be more beneficial to people like us.
We have a section, just like Mansee was highlighting, we have a section with, if my memory recalls, about 7 chapters or 8 chapters, I can't recall, which talks about exactly what you're asking for. And it talks about adaptability in Israel, and desalination in coastal areas, gray water treatment, membrane technologies, and so on. So yes, there are, at least as far this book goes, there are all these solutions that are provided. But again, these are more review type, so they talk about the technology and where they have applied. But if you are trying to get a solution for a very local problem, you need to look at the local hydroclimate, geological scenario, the surface hydrology, and so on, to find out a solution.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
There are more models also in the book, towards the end, in the solution section of it. So may I request Sheikh Hadia to really unmute himself and ask the question? I can also see it's written in the chat box, but I think it will be better that you directly interact with him. Sheikh, would you like to speak up for your question, or I should? Okay, so the question for you, Abhijit, is how much is the role of the hundreds of monitoring wells dug in central India plains over the groundwater depletion and its effect on surface waters?
So if you are calling them monitoring well, they are not supposed to be used to draw out water.
It's just to monitor.
So by definition, monitoring wells are to be just monitored, they're observation wells. So they should not be, intersecting or affecting the groundwater resource of the area. Now, on the contrary, if you say that hundreds of water abstracting wells, definitely that would have a huge impact on the groundwater resource of the locality you are interested in. Like I think Central India, that's what you said. So definitely it will have its impact. But just as monitoring wells, I would not expect any implications. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. So its monitoring wells are meant to be more measuring the situation and to take more decisions, Prafulla, I see you unmuted and now I don't see, but would you like to say something? Please go ahead.
Yes. First of all, I would like to congratulate Professor Mukherjee for doing such a wonderful job, particularly this. He has so many publications, particularly this global groundwater. It's an amusing job, particularly in one book, a lot of knowledge in the different dimension that has been put together. So that means when someone will go through, will find every aspect of groundwater, how to manage the problems, and in the worldwide, this is something great. And since I'm in Punjab, I just wanted to I have a little query regarding the groundwater solution, because already means Professor Mukherjee has discussed about this desalination, then atmospheric moisture, and some other aspect. So what is happening basically in Punjab, we have here intense agricultural activity. Mostly 80% of the groundwater is being used for rice and wheat. Those are the major crops. So is there any policy so that there will be crop diversification? Because if the rice will be continuously cultivated in Indo-Gangetic Basin, particularly where the groundwater is severely depleting, then I think by 2030 or even in a near future, so there will be a very means a big problem. So is there any means policy that should be in even the national level that should do the crop diversification, so that let's say where we have intense rainfall, rice will be cultivated there, and where we have scarcity like millets and other crops will be grown there, so that it will be within country, but there will be between country that policy will be made, and it will be also encourage the farmers, so that farmers will also means get that kind of encouragement to proceed this aspect. Is there any solution this aspect?
So the answer is possibly embedded in the question itself.
Yes.
So when I was a kid, in the like in my board days, like I used to learn geography, and when you talk about the cropping patterns across India, because I studied in India, we would always consider like Punjab and Haryana as lead producers of wheat or dry crops like barley and millet and so on. At least in my school books, it was never written that Punjab is a lead producer of rice. So
Yes.
what changed? Of course, the economy changed, and and my understanding is much of the rice that now grows in Punjab and Haryana are not just for consumption locally, but they are more for trade and export. So you possibly can get the economic angle therein. So what, the traditional crops, why did they change? Because, it was for more of a cash crop than, like a food crop. So if you are trying to build up any policy, and if that has to have any acceptability in the local forum, see, you and I can have so many discussion lines and, and so on, but it's not going to solve the problem on the ground. Because if you ask the farmer in Punjab, okay, from tomorrow onwards, you are not supposed to grow rice and should go back to wheat. Now, would that person be really changing overnight? Possibly not, because you don't have any incentive. Why would you do that? Who cares? Because, okay, I would dig another 10 meters and I'll get my groundwater. Why should I just change my profit that I'm getting from the cash crop? So then there has to be a mechanism and again, I'm not the expert that I should talk a lot on that, but I do understand that you need to have like an agricultural produce mechanism of incentivization where you can kind of, bridge that gap between the local classical food crop versus the cash crop. So when you say that, people are getting encouraged to grow millet, to my understanding, it was just the opposite of that they got encouraged to grow rice instead of millet. So if you have to take them back to grow millet, you possibly have to bridge their economic requirements.
Yes.
Now,
True.
how do you do that? I'm not the right person to discuss
Yes.
that for the economists and the social scientists to talk about. But I see that's one of the crux of the problem is, and I don't think science in itself can solve that problem. And you need, integration of policies and experts and economic development or economic incentivization in some way to augment that.
I think
Thank you,
that's
sir.
where
Thank
you
very
and the economists and the policymakers have to sit together, because then it can be seen in the right perspective. Sorry. Are you saying something?
No, that is it. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So much. Thank you, Abhijit. Thank you so much for this conversation, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And it was long pending, nearly 1 year. I have been after your life to do this conversation. So, and I think it was definitely worth it. So thank you very much for really taking out time in your travel schedule also. And we look forward to having more of you in water conversations. But before I close the session, I would also like to thank our previous speakers, who are more than 250 in our W4W speakers list, and also my core team, who have been really cooperating in making these conversations meaningful. The next Friday Waters is on Thesis Club, which is on July 21st at 5 p.m. IST. Today was exceptional time because Abhijit was traveling. Otherwise, we are having all sessions at 5 p.m. So next July 21st, we are having Priyank Samagra, a PhD scholar and a teacher, who is going to talk about his research on accountability during the delivery of municipal water services. Next Wednesday, which is our flagship program, that is Wednesdays for Water, July 19 at 5 p.m. We are continuing with our Riverscape series, and the session is number 5 in the series. And we are talking about rivers uninterrupted, the many lives of the rivers, where we are going to focus on Ganga, Yamuna, and Gomati. And we have speakers to talk about it. And it's going to be hosted by ICOMOS Central India and Nishant Upadhyay from Dharatal. Then we also do Monday Munching with Women for Water, where we want to acknowledge and appreciate the contribution made by women water warriors. And this July 17th, we have Dr. Paromita Chakravarti from SRM Chennai. And all the links are going to be available in our website, www.w4w. Please continue looking at our website. All our talks, nearing 200 sessions now, which is going to be one of the longest water conversations in the country. All our talks are available for open education, because water is not really taught enough the way I would aspire it to be taught. So we really look forward to these continued meaningful conversations. Friday Waters itself is going to reach 50 sessions in August. So we are super excited. And thank you so much, all of you, all the participants. I see quite a number of people in YouTube. Thank you so much for being there and listening from there, and all the participants in Zoom who have been really supporting in this endeavor. Thank you so much, Abhijita, once again. Thank you. Please take care.